Time now, 12 minutes past 6, and MSPs will debate later how to ensure people with ME get the treatment they need. More than 20,000 people across Scotland are believed to have the condition, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. Campaigners say despite huge developments in scientific research, there continues to be outdated attitudes by some healthcare professionals. Well, Helen McDade is from the campaign group ME Action Scotland. Good morning to you, Helen. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning, Laura.
What issues do you have with the way that some people with ME are still being treated?
Well, the problem really is a lack of education for the healthcare professionals. And sadly, the outdated attitudes from decades ago, that this is some kind of psychological problem, continues to be used when people come to see their medical professionals. So the research has moved on a lot and shows that immune, inflammatory, autoimmune nervous system issues are involved here. And this has become much more understood through the long COVID research. But needless to say, doctors, they've been trained a long time ago, they're busy people, they haven't necessarily kept up with that. So there's almost no education about ME in medical schools, and that continues on.
Well, I was going to ask about long COVID and whether it's complicating your situation or whether actually maybe it might be helping because people, medical professionals might becoming more understanding of the issues that you face.
Well, I think we're at a crucial point. It could go either way. There is no doubt that across the world, research into long COVID has helped. Unfortunately, often it starts from the position, and I would say here that not everybody who's ill long term after COVID has ME. Nevertheless, a considerable number of them, and more than 50% in many surveys, suggest that after 6 months, more than 50% of them could qualify as ME. So it's very unfortunate that quite a bit of the research starts from either the position that long COVID is something new, whereas in fact 75% of people with ME started with an infection of some kind. So there's a lot of correlation to be looked at there. Yeah. And unfortunately, if they start off thinking that it's ME, we need their attitudes to ME to help people with long COVID. Otherwise, they run the risk of being ignored and dismissed and sent away with no help, which unfortunately happens all too often.
And Helen, just to remind our listeners who perhaps don't know anybody who's suffered from ME, how does it affect people?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because about 20,000 people in Scotland have it, more than have ME, but have MS. But you're quite right that people often don't know. One of the key things about this is that they suffer from a symptom called post-exertional malaise. And that means that it's not just fatigue. You know, people say, oh yes, I know what that's like, I've worked hard. But post-exertional malaise is a very different thing. It means that people can do something and it may not be a lot. It may, for severe people with ME, they may be able on a good day to get out of their bed. But at the time, they don't feel the effects of that. And then later, it can be hours or days later, they then have all their symptoms are much worse. And that's called post-exertional malaise. So it's a very specific thing. It's almost entirely people with ME that have this. But as I say, a lot of people with long COVID are now also suffering. And that's due to the cells not producing energy properly. And
what sort of treatments are being given out by GPs who perhaps haven't had their continuing professional development on ME brought up to speed?
Well, yes, exactly. That's a great point, because graded exercise therapy has been recommended to far too many people over a long time, and that means increasing exercise gradually over time, even though they don't feel that well,
to try and build resistance up.
Yes, and people think, and I've heard doctors say there's nothing that exercise doesn't improve. Well, actually, this is the exception because of that cell issue, and so that's been shown to damage thousands of people. We have very sad stories still, and we're hearing them about people with long COVID being told to exercise and getting worse.
And that's no longer recommended by the NICE guidelines, sure.
That's right. The guideline came out in 2021 saying that graded exercise therapy should not be recommended. but we still hear about people getting recommended it or being told informally, oh, well, do your best to exercise and, it'll get better. So that's absolutely critical. And to be fair to the government, Professor Jason Leach did write a letter to the health boards notifying them of this change and saying that it included the removal of graded exercise therapy. Sadly, that doesn't get through to everybody, obviously. And so we need healthcare training and we need it urgently. But we also need specialist teams. There's no one to be referred to, including paediatricians. There's no one in doctors in the NHS who will say that they're a specialist in ME. That's pretty much the position in Scotland, and it's not good enough, and it has to change. And we need money for that. We need targeted funding so that specialist teams can be put together.
And is that what you're hoping today's debate might lead to? What are you hoping for from this members' debate in Parliament today?
Absolutely. We want, it sounds like a lot. We want 6.5 million a year. That's 3 appointments a year with a nurse or an allied health professional. That doesn't sound like a lot, does it, for someone with such an illness? And we've had 20 years of asking for this. That targeted funding is critical to do those specialist teams and to help with biomedical research. Something has to happen. We've had debates for 20 years. I was there 20 years ago. My daughter was ill for 13 years between the ages of 6 to 19. And I was there when they discussed the same things 20 years ago at the Scottish Parliament. We need action, and we're not going to come back in 20 years. Meanwhile, people are sitting in their homes, being looked after by their families because they've got no help.
Helen, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Helen McDade, one of the campaigners from ME Action Scotland, who will be heading to Holyrood for that debate later today.